Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Them. Season 1, Episode 1. It's called Day 1. Now, you might be thinking, does that mean Episode 2 is called Day 2? No, Episode 2 is called Day 3, because 2 days pass in this episode.
I'm not going to lie, that annoyed me a little bit.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that, because this episode would not have worked if they tried to just make it the first day. It'd have been too short.
No, I agree. I appreciate that they're not feeling beholden to their format too much. They're giving themselves some flexibility. I've noticed there's a few times during the season where they've got I can't remember what they called it, but there's a couple of different names that are clearly okay, well, this day takes 2 episodes, basically.
Yeah, it's a special. And there are a couple episodes back to back where it is just a 1 day progression, but there's a couple where it's no, it's jumped a couple days, presumably because the previous episode is going to cover 2 or 3 days.
But the most important part is the first episode is day 1, and the 10th episode, which the last episode is day 10.
Oh, so, there you go. Okay, so
it all ends up okay.
Okay, all right. So yeah, what is this? This is Amazon's horror show, which debuted last month. It is an anthology show per season, of course, not per episode. So this season 1 is set in the 50s. It is about a black family who moved to Compton, an ultra-white neighborhood where all the neighbors are not expecting a black family to be moving in. So it has kind of that mix of real-world social horror turned up to 11, mixed with seemingly something supernatural being teased.
Yeah, so a little bit amusing given what we think of as Compton today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know much about Compton, but I know there was a movie called Straight Outta Compton, and
I think it's more Latino now, but it was predominantly black.
Yeah.
For a long time. It's where a lot of the hip hop movement came from.
Yeah, so not an area of my expertise for sure, but clearly the context of this time period is very different, and that's basically the gist of the setup. There's a bit of a dark backstory as to why they need to leave their previous home, which we get right at the start, and yeah, that's basically the gist of it. Well, obviously we'll start spoiler free here since this is episode 1 of a new show. Just for the record, this was also our pilot winner every month on patreon.com/mailfuzztv. We put up 3 or 4 pilots from the previous month or so. Or if there wasn't many, we might throw in a couple of old pilots just to see if the fans want that instead. But this was the winner last month. So yeah, I will say I quite like this. I thought it was fairly strong. It's someone, especially as someone who does a horror movie podcast, right, with Tim, and has
a lot of horror.
Yeah, has a lot of movies. Watched a lot of movies where a family moves into a house and there might be something spooky going on. And as someone who is mostly kind of sick of that that setup, because it is overused today to an extreme degree, there's a lot of things in this. One, of course, you're mixing it with the more real world stuff, which we've seen done very effectively. You'll Get Out kind of started almost this wave of it, but even just in terms of TV, Lovecraft Country, not that long ago, it was doing a lot more pulpy than this, of course, but was doing kind of.
We really enjoyed that show.
Similar themes, yeah. So. Cool stuff, but I think the moment that it got me, it's fairly well directed. I think the creepy moments are directed well with a bit of confidence. They're not overly done, and when they do have a little jab of style that feels a bit more of a flourish, it feels like I don't know, they kept that in their back pocket to have the little moment, but it's intentionally just that one little moment to make it feel special, as opposed to yada all over the place. But the moment it grabbed me bizarrely was after the opening sequence, which is kind of the prologue scene. The way it went to the opening titles and the sort of the old school, almost 70s, and it came out set in the 50s, but the opening titles felt really 70s to me. It felt very almost Texas Chainsaw, the way it came up with some blurbs about, between these 60 years, over X million of black Americans moved from the Jim Crow South to various parts of the country. Many moved to California. Obviously, in this particular case, it was, I can't remember where did they move from. Was it North Carolina? Maybe North Carolina, but they're moving to California. And then it just comes up at the end, but the color of the text changes to, over the next 10 days, this family, this is what they went through. And then it goes into this sort of very stylized 70s style, old school movie opening titles. and it kind of put me in this mood where I'm like, okay, all right, you're going for a vibe, and you're achieving the vibe so far.
I agree with that.
So
The direction is pretty solid, for sure. I think I really enjoy all the social horror side of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as sold on the supernatural elements. They weren't grabbing me as much.
There's not a lot of it in this episode, actually. Funnily enough,
There's not.
They're not blowing their load on that, which I kind of appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
There's really only two. I mean, I guess other than maybe the dog, like, being suspicious of a door. There's only really two proper creepy supernaturally moments. I think one of them's just kind of fine. And I think it might play better like the more the show goes on, because there was something stylistic that was happening where it was cutting to an alternate like view of what was going on with like sort of bathed in red, and I think the thematic meaning of that will make more sense as the show goes on and we get more examples of it. The other one though I actually quite liked, where there was a sort of creepy seeing a figure in the dark kind of moment. I won't say any more than that right now, but I thought that was fairly well done, that particular moment.
Fair enough. I think it's just maybe I'm just not really feeling a lot of supernatural horror at the minute. I'm kind of just it's not something that's grabbing me right now in general.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I'm kind of it's so overdone right now. The last decade, pretty much at this point, that's been the predominant type of horror that we've been getting in movies, and horror goes through these phases, and obviously there's spins on it, there's different takes on it, but it has, but ever since. I mean, I guess Conjuring, but honestly,
I was going to say Paranormal Activity, to be honest. Yeah,
it may have been that really. That so that's responsible for two things that was a trend. Coming after it, the found footage being the other, but and I think this though, because it is taking its time with that side of things, and because it's treating it a bit more. Because I think I want to say Amityville Horror kind of starts with a similar vibe where it's like, this family, within a couple of weeks of moving into this house, so like, if not all dead, they're all screwed. They're all going to be messed up for life, and here's the story that leads to that. So I liked the episode quite a bit. I thought it was well directed. I thought the cast are fairly strong. Obviously the leads of the husband and wife.
They're doing a really solid job.
You got Alison Pill as kind of the main racist neighbor, who is all excited about her new neighbors, and then it's almost this controversy where everyone's like waiting to see who the new neighbors are, and the phone rings and there's like a moment of shock, and they're all just staring in disbelief. So you have this kind of ultra heightened white picket fence, perfect suburban American street. It's that visual, and then them all being just in shock and awe. And it's funny because I mentioned Lovecraft Country, like some of the tactics they kind of use in a way reminded me of things that happened in Lovecraft Country.
Okay, yeah, I get what you're on about, especially with them, when they moved into the neighborhood.
Yeah, that in particular, just some of the we want to convince them to leave kind of attitude and the tactics that sort of spawn
which makes me assume these were real tactics that we used.
Oh presumably. Yeah. I mean, obviously it starts off with the information about like the history of this is kind of set in. I don't think that this particular family are based on a real family. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone's going to tell me that there is.
I would assume not, but I think it was very much when you bury that little bit in all the text about the real verifiable facts. It kind of has that air of this is based on a true story sort of feeling. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I totally buy the tactics. I mean, I'm sure there'll be, if anything, this will be like a collection of all the real horrors that were endured, sort of wrapped into one story that we can kind of like see escalate. Because what you do with storytelling is you take something, you turn it to 11 to make the point clear. And in this case, you take that social horror, the feeling of everyone watching, the feeling of just not being wanted, and you kind of like turn that into a literal horror story, as well as the real thing still being there. In fact, me and Tim, the episodes that went out yet, but one of the last things we recorded before Tim went on paternity leave was a movie called His House, which also dealt with it was refugees moving to the UK, and again, very similar thing. It was this black couple who were trying to sort of get comfortable, but there was something kind of supernatural going on, and that took a sort of different direction with it, and it was very specifically about a sort of more present day refugee experience than it is, this historical thing. But
I can imagine. I think that'd be really interesting seeing that, given that this is now the third major kind of example of this story, that I can think of. They've all been American based, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So Get Out, Lovecraft, and then this. I would like to see the British take on that, and then kind of the differences, because obviously culturally, when it comes to there is some pretty significant differences.
Aye, plus you got Doctor Who, Mark and Matt Smith's in it, so you
Oh, is he? I genuinely didn't know that.
You can enjoy the Matt Smith minor role.
I was not just saying that because of Matt Smith. I had no idea.
Well, it's a Netflix movie, so it's.
Oh, well, Netflix hasn't recommended it to me yet.
So it's easy to get a hold of. Came out last year. So
Netflix is slacking. Their algorithm's not doing its job.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, the horror, at least good horror, usually can be tied to social stuff in the world. I mean, just to go back to, not just to plug Streams After Midnight again, but when George Romero died a few years ago, me and Tim sat down and we reviewed his trilogy, his original of the Dead trilogy. And the first two in particular, Night and Dawn, like, they're so rich with social commentary and they're about a lot of things. And the first one in particular has obviously got a lot of racial themes. Like, good horror has always been, and even when the specific movies aren't necessarily like super like thematic about a particular thing, the overall trend and what the horror is doing in general often will be. So, there was a lot of home invasions in the 2000s because people were scared of outsiders coming and invading, basically, right? So
it shares a lot of DNA with sci-fi in that regard.
Yeah, I would say it's less at the front or the forefront. Sci-fi tends to wear it a bit more on its sleeve and tends to like really try to bring up the conversation.
I would have said that was true about horror maybe 10 years ago.
Well, that's the thing. And that's the sort of thing that Get Out is perhaps, changed. Get Out's maybe prodded it in a way where people are like, hey, we can actually tell stories that get across how certain things make people like us feel by using horror as a conduit to say, hey, look, this is the...
Do it a bit more out in the open, so to speak, as opposed to just being subtext.
Yeah. So... And that's good. I think when they're at the quality that most of these examples have been, and it just so happens that most of the ones I've brought up have been fairly high quality, if not great quality. And I think this so far, after one episode, I think it's...
I think it's very good as well. Like I say, I wasn't really feeling the supernatural elements, but that might very well just be me being burned out on supernatural things. I think the rest of it is really quite good. I'm really into the the social horror stuff that is happening here. I think the direction is pretty great. Like I say, I think it's probably more me than it doing anything wrong, but it's probably gonna deserve a spot amongst those other things that we're talking about. And in terms of this is a great example of this genre.
It's just it's things as well, because I think what this one does that's maybe a little different from Noah's, at least from memory, is that I felt like this was cutting to what the white people were like talking about and planning a lot more than those. Yeah, I feel like a lot of those other examples, you'll stick with the black characters and you'll sort of speculate what the racist person's doing. It was a lot more
in their heads.
Yeah. Whereas here we actually cut to the other characters kind of debating, and there's a point, just a male thing. Again, keeping the spoiler free for the most part right now. But for example, there's a point where Alison Pill's character Betty is concerned that one of the neighbors doesn't seem to care that much, and it's like everyone else is up in arms. We have to get through this problem. This is a crisis we're in, and there's one person who maybe this isn't true, but perhaps from this we can infer maybe isn't as racist as everyone else and isn't that fussed.
It's an interesting conversation because she's saying that to her husband, who we've just seen in another scene. So we've kind of got, okay, we've formed independently a little bit of his opinion, not overtly, nothing strong, but just, okay, hintings at directions.
Yeah.
So and then her playing this off of him has this has extra context. Again, like it's a lot more from their side of things as opposed to just the one viewpoint like it is in a lot of the other examples.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to see what they do with some of the characters like that they're maybe hinting will be, I don't know, maybe ultimately allies, or at the very least will add a little bit more layers to just, there's at least a few people who are slightly less racist than the rest of the characters, which is a slightly different dynamic.
Yeah, the slightly less racist point in this is just them not caring enough to
harass
attack them.
Yeah, that's the sad part of this. Is it's not so much that they're champions saying no, don't
It's just like just you do you. I'm not going to take part. Almost.
Yeah. Which isn't really a free pass, but it's at least that they don't want to
undeniably better. But it's not good.
Yes. So that's the kind of skill we're working with. Anyway, it doesn't hold back. Like the dialogue from the white characters is pretty, dire. Not in a badly written way, but just in a horrific sense.
It's uncomfortable to hear, but again, kind of has to be in these sorts of things. Otherwise, it feels hollow.
Yeah, and I don't think it ever felt more harsh when they were talking about the kids as well. That was the stuff that really kind of stuck out to me.
Yeah.
So, obviously, it is rich in themes. It is a very conscious show. And if you're someone who hates any type of political commentary in any of your media, which for the record is all good media, but if you're someone who doesn't like that, then probably not for you. So there you go. So spoilers, I guess. We'll go into some spoilers just to talk about the events of episode 1. So they moved to the house. Obviously, the prologue scene is that they had a baby. Actually, what's funny, until the next couple of scenes made it clear, I actually thought this was going to be I thought this was where they're going to be moving to. Before I just found out they were going to Compton, which obviously wasn't going to look like this, I thought, oh, this is a scene from later in the show, and this is like, we're going to build up to this crazy woman. I thought that
at first as well. I think that's maybe one of my only complaints is the editing from this prologue into the main bit wasn't entirely clear as to what happened or when it happened.
It felt like we flashed back because the way it transitioned to the car.
Yeah.
This is a slight little nitpick, but just this crazy an actress who we've seen before. But I think she may have been in Lovecraft Country now that I'm thinking about it. Was she?
Yeah, but she's definitely got one of those familiar faces though. Like, I've definitely seen her in stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure she was in The Deuce if nothing else. But anyway, maybe it was. Maybe I'm confused with the actress, but she's been in a lot of stuff. But she basically, the implication is that she wants to kidnap their baby. The husband's out with the 2 girls, Henry's out with them, and she's on her own at the house with the baby. And it just sort of takes a sort of, and as far as horror goes, this scene is it's a horror movie, even though it's not necessarily getting to the supernatural stuff yet. It's very intimidating. You feel, the main character of Lucky, she's very on edge. You can feel that discomfort. You can feel her. At first, she's like, "Oh, I'll make small talk." This woman's sort of like, "What?" Because they're in a house that's like out in the middle of nowhere, so there's just fields around them. So it's not like they're next to a busy street where there's a lot of traffic.
Being polite.
Yeah. But as it goes on, it takes a bit of a turn. The women start singing this song, which you sort of feel is going to turn racist by the end of it. And indeed it does. I didn't really catch the lyrics specifically, but it was just kind of the emphasis on certain words and things like that. And but then we cut forward, and there's a lot of hesitation. They're talking about, oh, is this place going to be nice? Is there more black people in this area? And the wife kind of implies that there isn't, and she's a little bit nervous about that. And she then obviously gets more nervous because when they get there, not only does everyone stare at them as their car's pulling in, and it's very uncomfortable, but there's even a clause in the realtor's thing, what do we call it? The lease. That's what I'm looking for. Where there's like a statement saying that no black people basically will live in this neighborhood, and the wife notices and goes, "Wait a minute, what's this?" And the realtor's basically just like, "Oh, well, this isn't enforceable legally anymore." So
yeah, I assume this is something that's like a neighborhood group kind of make their own charter for who can join, because it seems very much like this pre-planned houses. They've all paid pretty much the same thing. They talk about that for their houses, so it's like a group charter that they've all agreed to, I imagine.
Yeah.
they're not enforceable anymore, or at least this particular clause isn't.
Yeah. So immediately feels unwelcome. He's like, no, this is our home. We're not going to keep running. We're going to keep running to new places. This is where we've decided to live. This is where we're going to be. But she immediately like goes and finds her handgun and starts loading it with bullets. She's like ready to fight. No hesitation.
Do you
And
like the direction is where it's cut into just to her kind of loading the bullets one by one, and you hear it, the click each time. But as it's doing it, it's like cutting around the house and showing everyone else and how just kind of how uncomfortable and dark it is.
Isn't this the scene as well where it cuts back to all of the glances people were giving her on the way in, like all of the build up?
I think it does, and it cuts to them still standing around outside because it's quite late at night at this point as well.
Yeah, because she's concerned that there's random people in the neighborhood standing outside the house at midnight, which is a bit weird. The next day, this is the thing that reminded me of Lovecraft Country, was the let's all be outside their house and make noise tactic. In this case, they just all have their radios on, just making a
all to different stations, so they're playing different things and just sounds like a wall of noise.
Yeah, so just a cacophony of noise.
Good word.
And yeah, you got all this going, and this builds, and it's the sort of thing where she's obviously growing in tension throughout the episode, and Henry does his best to kind of like bring her back down. She's trying to be strong for her kids, but of course there's a couple of major incidents that kind of drive her over the edge by the end of the episode. One of which, of course, is that the youngest daughter, Gracie, she is seemingly attacked by someone, and this is one of the supernatural elements of the show. In fact, both supernatural elements seem to revolve around her. It's a classic trope. You use a small kid. You use the small kid to do the first creepy
kids
stuff.
Are creepy.
Obviously the one that we talked about earlier with the different colors, the red sort of coming in. It's almost like an alternate world version of what was happening, where the actions were a little bit different, but she was still singing the song.
It was just did like a whole thing, like neck to one side, just like like say bathed in red light.
Yeah.
It's like say alternate world, almost like this is the real kind of what's actually happening, kind of seeping through.
And this creeps her out though, because she sings the same song as the woman did in the prologue scene. It's the same song, so this really freaks out Lucky. But then the big thing, of course, is when Gracie gets up in the middle of the night because she hears something or whatever. It does the classic. There is a silhouette of a figure just sitting in the kitchen, and actually one of the things I liked at the start of the episode is they made a real point of the husband pointing out the layout of the house. You can kind of see all of the doors, like the way the hall's sort of laid out. It's just like a straight hall that opens up into the big living room area, but the rest of the rooms are all just on this one hallway that's very straight, so you can kind of see the whole house looking down that. And she gets
it leads for a creepy visual, doesn't it?
Yeah, they're going to use that. I think they set that up right away because they want to like sort of make the house itself, if not a character, then at least make us so familiar with the layout that they can use that mechanically to build things.
It makes it feel pretty enclosed because it's quite a tight corridor, a little bit long, but it's relatively tight. So it's like it feels cramped just looking down it. It's reminiscent almost of like I don't know, like The Shining, like shots down the hallways.
Yeah, claustrophobic and yeah. But I think why this worked for me is that there is obviously a loud noise at the very, very, very end, right? But this figure just sits there quietly, and it's a woman of some kind who at least looks very tall. I don't know if it was just because it was a comparison to the kid who that's the perspective we were getting, but she felt like a very tall, lanky woman that made her feel just not like over the top designed in like a creature way, but just tall and lanky enough that it felt a little unsettling.
Just enough that it didn't feel normal.
Yeah, just a bit imposing. Yeah. But it takes quite a while before she stands up, and then it's so I think really what makes the scene work is the pacing and the they didn't do the music building like in a big creep. There wasn't like a high pitch like as she was getting closer.
Yeah.
It was just this quiet figure stands up, walks over, and the lighting's immaculate here, where the face is always in shadow. They're always in. There's like when you do get like maybe a slither of the side of a face, she might be burned or something. Like there's maybe a hint of like a damaged face, but you can't really tell. And they do a thing where it sort of leans in, and there's kind of it just cuts away, and it does the loud noise, but it does the loud noise. It sort of comes back on for the kids screaming, as if she's still being like shaken or grabbed by the ghost.
And it has like this is where it has like the screen kind of closes in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it felt like even once it done the loud thing, it did it in a way that was different than normal, because it didn't just end with her going "oh" and the big loud noise.
Sure.
It did that quietly. It cut to black, and then it came back loud with like a moment of like just hyper, like craziness and tension, and then did the closing thing, and then it was the next morning that Lucky notices like the marks on her neck as if she's been burned or something. And then she's this is the thing, like obviously from the perspective of all the neighbors. So Lucky here at the end, who runs out with her gun. This is the end of the episode. She runs out with her gun and basically starts yelling for everyone to leave them alone, because obviously she's not jumping to "there's a spooky ghost in my house." That's
she's assuming one of them's broken in.
Yeah, so she's yelling in the middle of the street with a gun, and everyone's like sort of hiding behind their doors and getting scared. And it's this thing where, from all of the neighbors' perspective, now they actually are seeing something that they see as proof that they're dangerous, that Lucky is a dangerous person, and this is only going to fuel their bigotry, their bias, all these things. But we have seen the episode from Lucky's perspective, the slowly ramping up, the tension of people being outside the house. Obviously, the other thing that happens towards the end here is that the dog has died, and we actually know that the other neighbors were kind of planning on this.
Which makes me question, like, is this a random supernatural occurrence, or is it almost like, a curse, so to speak, set by, some of the other group? Maybe better yourself.
Oh yeah, we're going to find out that some of them have like come from witches or something like that.
Maybe, because I don't know, like the idea that, hey, that's the plan, let's kill the dog, and then all of a sudden the dog's dead, and it's terrifying.
I suspect that the dog is unrelated to the supernatural thing. I suspect that because what the plan we hear when the men are debating is like, oh, we should put something, a dog treat out like with bleach on it or
bleach
something.
Bone.
Yeah. And that'll kill the dog, and that'll be like how we drive them out kind of thing. And I suspect that that's what's happened to the dog, is that the dog is just the result of the neighbors doing what they plan to do, and it's not directly tied to the supernatural stuff right now.
I don't think it is. The dog looked like it had its like head like twisted. It didn't look like it had just died.
True. Yeah,
because that would be just that would just poison it. It would just get sick and die. It wouldn't. That looked like it like had its neck snapped. I was assuming the supernatural entity had killed the dog because the dog seemed to kind of know it was there, right? So it's that classic trope of get rid of the dog / kid, whichever one spots the thing first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know what's literally causing it in the show, but clearly, I think the supernatural thing represents the horror that is created by all the hatred that everyone else has for them. And so the idea is, at least right now, it seems to be trying to drive them out.
It does. There is also a possibility that it is something to do with just the house, because we know, that the realtor, they said she sold it at a loss to them. So it's like, well, is there a reason that they're trying to get rid of it cheaply?
The white neighbours assumed that because they assumed that they couldn't afford the same price they did. I don't think we ever actually got a confirmation that she sold it at a loss.
I thought they did. Sorry, I thought when they said, I thought it was she sold it at a loss to them, not a maybe she did.
No, I took that.
Fair enough.
I took that as their speculation.
Fair enough.
They don't say it as speculation. They say it as if they know for a fact, because that's just
right. And I assumed, given how clearly gossipy the neighborhood is anyway, I thought maybe one of them did have it as a fact.
I didn't take it as that way. Because
I mean, you're very well could be right, because clearly he's got a pretty reasonably well-paying job.
Yeah, he's got this big new job, and we don't get a lot of that, but we do see that the receptionist kind of assumes that he's working in the kitchen, and he has to kind of like insist a couple of times that he's not looking for the kitchen, he's looking for the engineering department. And yeah, so we get a little bit of that. So even people that work in his
all right
job,
once he gets to his job, though, like into that department, they kind of just hand him the papers and off he starts. He seems happy.
They stare him a bit, so clearly not every employee was like necessarily on board for this, but they're expecting him. They're not. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like like the receptionist or the neighborhood. It's they're not saying they're particularly welcoming or anything like that. They're not like rolling out the rolling out the red carpet or anything, but it's like, here's your stuff, get on with your job. It seems a reasonable attitude at least.
Yeah.
Compared to the rest.
So I was getting to the idea that the ghost or the spirit or whatever is a manifestation of all the hatred that people, the idea that hatred becomes this living thing and whatever, is the idea that because it's not so much that someone intentionally put a curse on them to kill the dog. It was more because that was the will of the hatred around them that the spirit sort of naturally has done this kind of thing. I wonder if that's kind of, like, which would suggest the only way to defeat this spirit, if I'm right in my sort of summation of that, would be for enough of the people to, change their minds, and enough of the people to learn their lessons and kind of have some empathy, which I don't know if they're going to succeed in that in the show, but that would given what I've proposed, I think the ghost is in a way.
It's interesting because one of the ideas that Bay has is like, well, let's just, they're not going to leave because they come from a worse place than this, so they've got determination to say, so let's make this place worse than that. And I can see this almost kind of being a kind of a self-defeating thing that they've got, where they kind of succeed and they lose their neighborhood in a sense. Because like I say, we know from just history, Compton becomes a predominantly black neighborhood. So I wonder if like they succeed in making it quote unquote worse and kind of just ruin it for themselves, and that they kind of win that way.
Oh yeah, I mean Compton wasn't picked accidentally or coincidentally
Not
for
at all.
this. That was an intentional choice. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be literal that someone's causing this, or if it's more just a manifestation of the hatred.
Yeah.
Nothing in this episode as of yet gave me the impression that the housewives were dabbling in supernatural stuff themselves.
Honestly, it wasn't even something that crossed my mind as I was watching it. It was literally just as we were talking. It was just like, what if?
I mean, it's not impossible. I don't know how far it's good, because we've watched one episode. I don't know what, like, maybe there'll be a history. Maybe they'll go the classic route of there's something under the house, or the house was built on something, or whatever.
It's so early to speculate because we don't really know enough especially about the supernatural side of it. There's very little to go on yet.
Yeah. So it was a really good first episode, though. I'm tempted to keep going with it and return to it. Now, I don't suspect that you will be, just because you've got a reduced recording schedule. But
it's a shame because I do actually think it's very good.
But I think I might add it to the rotation, especially since a couple of shows just ended. So I do have a little bit of room for something. So if I find time for this in the next few days to a week to do episode 2, I might slowly work through it and put my thoughts up. It's a 10-episode show. Episodes vary wildly in length. There's one that's there's one that's as short as 33 minutes, and I think the longest is maybe just under an hour. But I'd say most of them are about 45 to 50.
Yeah, I'm looking. Most are about 40. I'd say is the majority, and then you got a few that are a bit above and a few below. But yeah.
Which I don't dislike that, because it shows me that they're not stretching episodes for the sake of filling a quota of what they consider an episode length to be.
Yeah, it's the same thing we were talking earlier about, kind of forcing themselves to fit their format with the title. I'm seeing here there's like, day 7 morning and day 7 night is some of the episodes. So they're flexible enough, which is definitely a good thing.
And I'm genuinely not sure like how different the show's going to be by the end of the season, because it does feel like there's a lot to go through in these 10 episodes, and the build in these first 2 days is already quite dramatic, that I'm very curious as to
how much it's going to escalate.
Yeah, how much is it going to escalate? Like, how does it change much by the end? What other characters are introduced? Like, what else do we do? So I'm curious. So no, them is pretty good. And actually, good use of, and it's not always well done when this happens, but I thought it was a good use of having someone say the title in the show.
Yeah.
Partly because it's just a simple word, so it's easy to sort of slot in. But the way it was used by Alison Pill, where it's where she's mad that the neighbour doesn't seem to care as much as everyone else does about driving them out. It says, wait, that's a bigger concern than them. and it's the way she sort of emphasized it. Just
the emphasis.
It worked. It really worked as a, and you kind of got that. I mean, the title could have been the other way around, where it was more about them outside who are invading our home and like try to get us to move. It can mean either direction, but sort of.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get it used in both ways.
It probably, yeah, very possibly. But yeah, so I thought that was neat. So. There you go. That is Them, episode 1 from Amazon Prime. So easy enough to access if you got the service. Go have a look for yourself and see if you're interested in it. But let us know what you thought of the first episode in the comments below. You can like and subscribe, all that stuff. That is super helpful and it helps support the channel and everything we do. You can also do that financially, of course, over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. As we mentioned earlier, this was a pilot vote winner. It'll be another one of those up soon on Patreon. So go have a look and see if you're interested. Otherwise, get us on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates. But that is us, so thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it, and we will see you next time.